having a career as a sports therapist and then going on to study a PhD is a mammoth achievement. Today, I'm speaking with Ashley Jones, who has done exactly that. So, Ashley, tell the listeners a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm a graduate sports therapist. I graduated from the University of Huddersfield back in 2008 now, so a fair few years ago. And sort of due to sort of the placements that I'd done as a student, I secured my first job in professional football straight away upon graduation. So I got a part-time job at Chesterfield Football Club, who were in League Two at the time. And then within sort of a year, I got offered the full-time head of academy medical role, which had been rolled out with the new sort of EPPP things that were going on in football. So I did that job until 2013. And I also had a private practice within a gym facility that myself and my wife ran alongside the football. And then in 2013, I took a part-time job at Leeds Beckett University, sort of carried on working part-time in football and a little bit in ice hockey, and then undertook an MSc in football rehab at Edge Hill. And then I'm just a glutton for punishment because as soon as I'd finished my MSc at Edge Hill, I enrolled on a PhD at Leeds Beckett. So that was started in 2015. At the same time, started full-time lecturing on the sports and exercise therapy course there and the sports medicine program. And I'm also a member of the SST board. Have been just for over 2 years now. And yeah, that's probably me in a nutshell, really.
Super. So, what made you want to be a sports therapist when you first started out? And this may go back to when you were younger, I suppose, making your choices to go to university. But what made you want to be a sports therapist?
Yeah, so initially, just my sort of dad suffered with sort of chronic lower back pain, and I used to go along to the physio appointments back in the day and sit and watch and listen. I was quite intrigued by that profession, just of the MSK therapy profession, and I sort of managed to secure my work experience from school at Chesterfield Football Club, which was my local team I used to go and watch. So obviously quite starstruck at the time with that, and got to know the club sports therapist. So naturally then it just became my focus to get the best A-level results I could and get as much practical experience as I could. So I used to just go and volunteer on the holidays and just be around. So naturally I was always going to try and get a job role in that area. But what made me, I was intrigued by the profession, but also I quite like helping people and seeing progress and helping people reach milestones and empowering people. So, you know, that's one of the main reasons that I kind of wanted to go down that route. Quite a personal character, so I like working with people. So again, helping them achieve goals and just being a sociable type of character. So obviously the football environment really resonated well with me, and I really enjoyed sort of the camaraderie of that type of thing. So that sort of made me want to go into that profession, even as a schoolboy student. And then just what made me want to work in elite sport. So I was never going to be a professional athlete, and I'm sitting down so you can't see my physique, but yeah, I was never going to be an athlete. So the next best thing is to obviously try and be around the environment by treating them on a daily basis and being involved in the success and roller coaster ride of elite sport, even if it's from the sidelines. So yeah, that was kind of what made me want to go down the profession. I didn't really want to work in the NHS, so physio wasn't really an option for me. I always wanted to work in the sporting environment. So obviously this degree, sports therapy, was something I read into, and I thought, yeah, this is absolutely the right thing for me to undertake.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said there. I mean, I've spoken to quite a few people on the podcast who've said that they started out by actually going and volunteering and giving up their free time in order to support and go into professional clubs in order to get that sort of experience, but also create those relationships as well. So it's actually interesting. There's quite a common theme that people are going out there and doing that sort of free work, voluntary work, in order to get to where they are in the future, which is really interesting. So, and you also mentioned a few attributes that you sort of gained from being in that environment. So, can you just tell me what makes a good sports therapist?
First of all, we talked about the personable character. I think you've got to be a good listener. You've got to be sort of empathetic to people's personal circumstances and situations you're going to be facing. When you're treating patients, you're going to get people that are on top of the world because they've just managed to train for the first time in 9 months, and you're going to get people on the floor when they get diagnosed with an ACL rupture, and you have to be able to adapt to those different situations and try and almost coach people through injury from a psychosocial aspect as well as a physical aspect. So I think it's having that holistic approach makes a good sports therapist. I think it's about having the ability to reflect as well. What I've been practicing now for 12 years. I worked in elite sport, and I would no way. I teach the next generation of sports therapists, but I would no way say that I'm an expert in anything really. Even the PhD that I'm doing, I'm still not an expert. I'm trying to be, but that takes a lot of time, and I think you never the finished article. So I think a good sports therapist needs to have the ability to reflect on what their strengths are, but their areas of improvement, and seek opportunities to develop those. So whether that's working with others in a community of therapists, ideally, if that's in your work environment, in my role now, say for example, going and sitting with another member of staff teaching the thing that you've taught, to see how they deliver it. What other ways do they teach? As a therapist, going and taking a complex case and discussing it in a roundtable discussion about how you would assess, treat, and rehabilitate that, or what other concepts and ideas other people might have. So I think it's really important that you kind of not to shy about what you do and don't know, and not to almost, because that will stop you trying to develop and improve. And I suppose off the back of that, a good sports therapist really should be current and in with the latest research in the area of sort of sports exercise medicine. So, that our profession doesn't stand still. There's always new ideas and concepts that are being investigated in research. And I think we should really we owe it to ourselves and our patients to be always trying to kind of be at the forefront of that, as opposed to being reactive when it's been sort of out for those ideas have been well rehearsed out for a while and almost have moved forwards without us. So I think to be a good sports therapist, you should really be thinking about those things.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the main points you made there, Ash, was almost the communication side of things. Whether you're communicating with a player who's potentially looking at a life or career-ending injury, or whether it's someone who you're trying to motivate in order to assist with their performance, or whether you're communicating with the player's parents, coaches, etc. And that all falls underneath sort of our umbrella as a sports therapist. So I think that's one of the major points that I always come across with sort of developing those communication, those softer skills in order to make a sports therapist a well-rounded practitioner. So you mentioned there that you're sort of bringing forward the next generation of sports therapists through your lecturing, but you're also currently in the final stages of your PhD as well. So tell us what your PhD is about and what have you found out so far?
Right, I'll try and condense it to a nutshell. This is almost like an exam, a bit of a viva. So, so my PhD title is focused on muscle function prior to injury, following rehab, and at the point of return to play in professional footballers. So I suppose that the inception of the PhD was to work out whether muscle injuries still remain the most problematic, because they obviously in the early 2000s in all the epidemiology studies, they were really prevalent. So the first thing I did was undertook an epidemiology study, so an audit of injuries essentially in 10 different professional football clubs. And we found that actually injuries, the incidence of injuries increased so to about 9 to 9.1 injuries per 1,000 hours in male professional footballers in all playing or competing in the English Football League, so the sort of second to fourth tier of English football. Found that muscle injuries are still remaining the most prevalent, which isn't surprising from kind of anecdotal work that I've done over the years in football, but obviously still to categorise that and give that a prevalence rate was important. And re-injuries have also increased by sort of between 8 and 10%, depending on the literature you read. So actually what we're finding is players are going back into train or match play and then re-injuring within 3 to 6 months of being back into that environment and that load-bearing schedule. So what we're also seeing is possibly, is there some gaps in the rehabilitation return to play phase that we need to consider? So that led me on to looking at muscle function and also quantifying muscle or lean tissue mass in a group of footballers. So essentially I measured 193 football players on their muscle function in pre-season at baseline, and I got 130 of those to have lean tissue mass, so a whole body DEXA scan taken for their lean tissue mass quantification in pre-season. And sorry, the muscle function measure was TMG, or tensomyography, which is a involuntary muscle contraction that is induced, and then essentially you measure the displacement of the muscle, so how much it moves and how fast it moves. So what we found was that actually football players are very, very homogenous as a sample. So we couldn't even detect any differences between playing position, consistent differences this is, in their lean tissue mass or their muscle function. Their age, so no consistent differences between a younger versus an older player. And even between limb dominance. So you read about asymmetry being a risk factor for injury, and you read about footballers must have asymmetry because they have a standing leg and a kicking leg, and it's a unipedal activity. But actually, they run between 10 and 13 kilometres a game. So fundamentally, the main thing that they do is run, which is a bipedal activity. So the asymmetries weren't detected using in the measures that I took. I then tracked them over 3 years to see what injuries occurred, and no surprise, muscle injuries occurred most often, and within that, hamstring injuries occurred most often, which again we're comfortable with knowing about that already. But then what I did was have a look at those that got an injury. What was their baseline muscle function and lean tissue mass measurements? Was there any difference between a healthy and the injured samples in their limbs? And was there any difference within the person as well? So in their contralateral limb, was there a difference in their function or their lean tissue mass? And actually, we found that there wasn't. So a non-significant finding is still a finding. So we found that essentially the equipment that we've used wasn't really a useful predictor of injury. So screening people at baseline for injury prediction is probably not the most valuable way of doing it using the equipment that I use in a PhD. And finally, what I did when they sustained an injury, I managed to get 14 of them to be repeat measured. So I measured them within 5 days of injury, and I measured them at the point when they returned to play, just to see how the muscle function behaved during the injury phase, I suppose, of recovery. So within 5 days, I found that displacement significantly and consistently reduced, and that's probably due to things like excitation, contraction, coupling impairment, or extracellular matrix damage if you're looking at the physiology. But it's interesting to see that was consistent within the players, because this has never been looked at on a live injury before, or on a football-induced injury. Then found that it rose again at the point of return to play, so it wasn't significantly different to baseline. So we did find that players did recover to within a sort of 5% to 10% swing of where they were at baseline. So essentially, it is sensitive enough to detect, or my inference is that on 14 players, we can see that it can detect differences following injury. So it might be something that this TMG equipment that quantifies or estimates muscle function could be used as part of the rehabilitation and recovery process following a muscle injury. So it was really a bit of a first look and see as to how this kit could be used to assess injury risk. Not really, but could it be used? during the sort of injury rehabilitation, which would still mean you'd have to take a baseline. And we found that on a small sample of 14 players, yes, it could. So it's definitely something that needs to be researched further. But I suppose that's where we're at the minute with it, and there's plans to maybe go further down the line in the future.
Okay,
so that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, so in terms of that TMG, what's the placement like for the equipment? Is it on a specific muscle with each?
Yeah, so for the study that I did, it only measures superficial skeletal muscle. So it's so you can't go for any of the deep lying muscles. So essentially, I measured the bicep femoris, the rectus femoris, both heads of the gastrocnemius, the adductor magnus, and then I did the glute max as well. And I selected those besides the glute max because they're all obviously muscles that generally get injured in football, so their prevalence rate was higher than others, and they were superficial. But yeah, essentially what happens is you put two electrodes either side of a central point. So you've got a probe that's almost like a clicker pen that sits on top of the muscle, so it's superficial to skin level. You have an electrode either side that stimulates the muscle to contract, and then the pen reacts to, or the sensor reacts to that, and then the actual sensor measures the radial displacement, so the amount of movement that occurs and the speed of that movement. So it plots a time displacement curve essentially, that then those parameters are estimated from. So TC, which is your contraction time, is got some loose validation to muscle fiber type. So you can sort of estimate that the muscles that have got a high proportion of fast twitch might well have a quicker reaction with that. And displacement has a loose reaction. A loose association to force output. So it might be that the more movement there is, the more force can be elicited, because you'd expect a larger proportion of mass could move something further, and they're stronger, or can elicit more force, should I say. So again, it's quite new technology, and that was one of the reasons for the novelty of the PhD, to try and unpick it, and could it be used in clinic? Has it got some clinical utility? Because it's portable, and this equipment costs about £12,000 to £15,000 to buy. So, a football team could afford that versus an isokinetic tonometer to measure maximal force out, isometric force output, for example, which would be 30 to 40 grand. So it does give us that potential to quantify indices of function portably. But again, it's still quite, it's quite new technology, so we still don't know as much about it as we'd like to before we start to really sell it as the answer to all functional measures. So that's kind of where it's at the minute.
Yeah, and I suppose it might be quite difficult to sort of differentiate between playing position because of the way that players train now, in terms of there's lots of small-sided games which rely on players doing quite a lot of very similar movements. And so actually that could be a potential for why you're not necessarily seeing those differences, and it might be more of an injury-based quantification as opposed to being able to differentiate between playing position, for example. Yeah,
so it was useful to see what I suppose footballers, to create a profile for a footballer, really. So when I did the sub analysis with the different independent variables, what it really showed was that just take the raw value. Don't worry about subcategorizing by playing position, by dominance, because actually footballers are very homogenous people. They do train very similarly. That's why the co-founders are so few for football players in general, because they have very similar diets, they have very similar exercise patterns, they generally live quite similarly, because they're so regimented into a routine that we feel more comfortable that if you were testing Joe Bloggs or a group of students, that the amount of co-founders within their sort of daily, weekly routine in terms of exercise, diet, nutrition, anything else will affect things more so. So yeah, it was nice to get those whole values. So now, really, if a football player does sustain an injury, you can look at those baseline values to look at and see where they should be at, and really that is useful and novel for going forwards for for future research in this area. So yeah, fingers crossed the examination team will feel the same as well.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
So, what were the most difficult parts of completing your PhD there?
Right. So yeah, I've got a few for you. So I think the first thing was, I mean, I've done it part time alongside a full time job. So staying motivated for 6 years has been, or it will be 6 years next June. That's been quite tough at times. Although I've really enjoyed it. So because I've learned so much and developed so much that, and there's always a different task to be doing. So you know that does change it up a bit, but you do have to be quite a motivated person to do that. Time management's been it's been quite difficult at times because obviously I mean in this time doing the PhD I've fathered 2 children, I've had 2 house moves, I've gone to a full-time job, and we've had a medical pandemic. So you know they're only the things that I can think about off the top of my head. So yeah, it's obviously factoring all that into to doing this as well, and having the headspace to, especially during this time where I'm writing up and finishing off, this is actually the most challenging part, because when you're collecting the data, you are just a technician. You're just collecting information, and once you get into the groove of that, it's quite straightforward. But now I actually have to unpick and understand exactly what I've done and why I've done it and what it means, and the contributions to knowledge and things like that. So yeah, that the time management of that's been quite hard, but still it's achievable if you want it enough. And I suppose one of the big things is like resilience. You have to be able to accept critique and sort of criticality a lot. You know, you're sending work to supervisors, you're having conversations with your research team, your group, or your fellow PhD students, and I mean, I'm sure people have heard of the imposter syndrome that surrounds kind of being a student of any kind, but certainly like a PhD student who's also a senior lecturer already. You know, it's almost expected that you're the finished article when you're a young researcher. Essentially, you're quite wet behind the ears when it comes to devising independent projects and being having the answers to things and being able to really write with great precision. So yeah, you have to have a lot of resilience to be knocked back and told that what you've produced is okay or it's good, but there's always lots of things to find that can be better. So I think the big thing is kind of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So being able to go into situations and go into meetings and being comfortable with what you do know, but equally being comfortable with what you don't know, and almost being okay with the fact that you found a non-significant finding. And you know, footballers haven't got asymmetries. You know, being able to physiologically explain that, but also being okay about the fact that it didn't hit the hypotheses you wanted it to, or what you thought it might, should I say, or that you expected, or that, you know, anecdotally you thought it would be. So yeah, it's been challenging, but I've absolutely loved it. So, you know, equally, I can't say that it's been difficult. It's been challenging rather than difficult, should I say.
Thanks for that, Ash. And I think you've almost given some bit of advice there for anyone who wants to undergo a PhD, any sports therapist who are thinking about planning a PhD in the future. But is there any other bit of advice that you'd say for someone who is thinking, I want to embark on this mode of study?
Yes, first thing I think is just make sure that if you select a PhD, you're interested in the topic area. You know, I know that sounds really basic, but you know, there are PhDs available all the time that people, I'm sure, look at and think, you know, that sounds okay. I might do that, but you are investing a huge proportion of your time for a long period of time. So it's got to be something that you enjoy reading about and immersing yourself in. And I suppose off the back of that, if it's something you enjoy, you know, hopefully you've got contacts in that field, and that helps. Use your contacts wisely. You know, I was really lucky that I managed to use my contacts in football to obtain convenient samples, but big samples, which has obviously made hopefully my thesis and my write-up and my future publications look strong, because, you know, I've used the people that I know and that bought into what I was doing and me, I suppose. Big thing is take time away from it as well. I think especially when you're doing it for 6 years, and or even if you're doing it full time, there's got to be weeks where you just put it down for a week and then go back to it, because there's been times where I've thought, right, okay, I need to work on this and I've got 3 days, so I need to do 3 full days. And by the end of the second day, you're almost getting a bit burnt out sometimes if you've worked on it for 8-9 hours. And then if you leave it for a few days and go back to it, you pretty much rewrite it because what you've wrote wasn't particularly great. And also you have a different perspective. You look at it through a different lens. So I think that having the balance of being able to pick it up, but also be able to put it down is really important. If you're looking at supervisors, choose them wisely. You're going to be working closely with them for a long time. If that supervisors are interesting characters, because they all expect something different of you, and you have to learn how to manage and temper their expectations and your own expectations of them. So my supervisors I've got 2 new ones, because both of mine unfortunately left the university during my PhD. I'm still in touch with the originals, which is great, but it's actually been there's been some good things about getting a new supervisor who looks at it very differently, but equally choose them wisely so that they will stay involved with you should they not be around at the university in the future. And just finally, just enjoy the process, because it makes you a better human being, as in a better critical thinker, and it does make you look at things very differently and challenge and question. And I think a lot of us at the minute have seen with the kind of data that's coming out from the government and from various sources about the pandemic, there's so many holes that you could pick at, and so many inconsistencies at times about messages that are based on scientific data, that once you've kind of gone through and processed like a PhD or a master's or anything that's got a heavy research component, you start to think about what are the implications of that? What does that mean? And actually, you start to look at how things are written and really challenge it. So it's quite interesting, just to make your brain work differently, really, because as a therapist, I don't think we're necessarily trained as scientists. We're trained as therapists that have a lot of grey in our lives, a lot of greyness. It's not all black and white as a therapist, but often in science it kind of is. So it's quite nice to have that balance.
Fantastic. Thanks for that sort of honest appraisal of how it's gone and what people need to be thinking about. So have you got any published studies that people can go and have a look at, Ash, or is there somewhere where people can go and find out more about you?
So yeah, I managed to publish my football audit back in 2019. So that's available, and I'll send you a link for that, or if you could put it into a bio or something. And also I've managed to publish the standard operating procedure that I've used for my tensomography TMG assessments. So that's available as well. And we've got 3 more publications there in the sort of final stages, kind of a validity study, viability study, and then another couple of papers around the use of TMG on as a measure of function for an Achilles tendon, plantar fascia problem. So you've got kind of a different take on it there, and looking at the gastrocnemius measurements. So that's available already. So I'll send you these so you can have a look at them and put them into the bio. And just, yeah, that's probably the main area. And then ResearchGate, I try and update when I've got time. But again, that sometimes falls by the wayside. So that's probably the best place to start. And then my Leeds Beckett profile does link to our sort of publications too. I also lead the research group at Leeds Beckett. So once we do get through this strange time, or even possibly during it, depending how long it lasts, that we will be hosting an MSK research symposium, which was all set to go, and I got Johnny Wilson speaking at that event, and then literally that was the 3rd week in March. So obviously we got locked down the week before it was due to take place. So I'd got 100 people to that, who were mainly local sports therapists and rehabbers and physios and and some of our students. So we will be hosting another symposium in the future where we'll present research from our team, and obviously mine will be involved in that. So, do keep a lookout on my Twitter account, and also the Society of Sports Therapists Twitter accounts. I tend to put things on there too, if I think if it'd be beneficial for members and members of the public that follow that page. So yeah, that's probably the best place.
And quickly, Ash, just what is your Twitter account for listeners?
Now you're asking. I think it's at Ash Jones 1987. But let me just check this number, Scott. Again, if you could put it in the bio for me, that'd be useful.
Yeah, no worries. So obviously we'll put all the links to any papers, and I'll stay in contact with Ashley, so we'll have an up-to-date list of any references that of articles that he has published, and obviously any contact details will be put into the show notes, so then you can go straight to Ashley's Twitter when he remembers what it was.
Yeah, it's at Ash Jones 1987. So capital A. That's all. But yeah, I mean, if anybody is interested in any kind of particularly football-based research around muscle either health or quality or function, that tends to be the research interest of mine and several members of our group in both male and female football. So, just drop me an email, drop me a direct message or a line, and yeah, I would be happy to chat over anything that anybody wants to possibly explore or investigate. It's interesting to hear about. It's really important that sports therapists do make a dent in the research world, because we're doing some great things as a profession, and we need therapists to be publishing now. So it'd be great.
Ashley, thanks very much for coming on the Sports Therapy Community Streamed. Obviously, I'll link all those bits and pieces up in the show notes, and hopefully you've stoked a few fires in sports therapists who are looking forward to doing PhD study. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.